Two,
Okay.
three, and we're live.
Hi, guys. My name is Oliver, and this is the fifth edition of the podcast. And I'm just going to do a quick introduction. Today's title is Nutrition for Longevity. So, introduction about me. I've been doing martial arts for about 15, 16 years, mainly full-time. I grew up in a very health-conscious family. I'll tell a story again about my mum. She's like a dancer. So every day since, 40 years, she will get up and she will exercise and stretch for an hour, 2 hours, sometimes twice a day. And so I kind of grew up into that physical training, health-conscious kind of environment. And she would, like I said, she would run like 10K and then come home and do like a cold bath in the 80s, and she would eat a lot of raw food and stuff. And, the science then wasn't as it is now, but I could definitely see the effects. She was always in good shape, she was always super fit and able to train. And she's like in her 60s now and she still trains 1 or 2 hours a day. So then I kind of grew up in that environment, always being very, very super conscious of my health. No cornflakes were allowed in the house, all that sort of thing. It's kind of annoying then. And then as I got older, I got into health, and what was available was sort of the metabolic kind of bodybuilder style culture in kind of the early 2000s, and that was sort of men's health. And I remember having 3 years worth of this magazine, and I looked through it, and they were just regurgitating the same stories, and they were all they weren't evolving, and I kind of was like, it doesn't kind of add up, And so then I kind of was a bit disillusioned with that. And around 15, 16, I started to get into really hardcore sort of heavy training. And I did sort of do, 6 or 7 days a week, dusk till dawn for a few years. I would wake up and I would train for 2 or 3 hours a day, maybe 3 or 4 times a day. And so I got to this point where I would do a lot of N=1 testing, which is, you just kind of, essentially, you're kind of recording your results and kind of eliminating variables and teaching yourself what works for you personally in a nutrition sense. And so through this process of being really sort of in shape, eating a lot of calories, I would do that, and I would do that fasted sometimes. And that would give me really good sort of experiential feedback on nutrition, because I could really get an instant kind of feedback. And so then I started to get more and more into this, into nutrition again. And I discovered the work of Weston Price, 2006, 2007. And I just went on an all-out Weston Price style diet for the next 10 years or so, I guess. But then kind of adapted it and then kind of used that as a springboard. So that's kind of my personal background anyway, and my interest in nutrition. And it kind of goes hand in hand with my training. And I would always use the nutrition as a barometer I would use recovery as a barometer for the effectiveness of nutrition. And then as I learned more about Weston Price, I realized, recovery, inflammation, and fertility were all affected by the same sort of foods. Anyway, so I kind of started to think, okay, so what is it in nutrition that I can do to kind of maximize those effects? And I want to get into Weston Price stuff a bit later, but next thing that I kind of got into was learned about was CRON, which is calorie restriction or caloric restriction with optimal nutrition. And so this is, now fasting is all the rage, but back in the day, there was this, I think they're still going, community of people who were just eating extremely low calories, and they were, all due respect, they look skeletal. And I kind of thought, I don't really want to get into that because I want performance as well. So I just want to kind of use this opportunity to kind of share my sort of personal nutrition philosophy. So, and it's kind of, the idea is to kind of minimize sort of aging, stress. So the basic outline works a bit like this. Essentially, how do you measure aging? I think one really effective way to measure aging is through cell death. So many things cause cell death, you know. Essentially interaction, any kind of process or interaction can cause, you know, wear and tear. In particular, some more complex processes that are more likely to occur when you have a higher turnover of cellular kind of work, like glycation, which involves sort of bonding with a sugar the wrong way, like oxidation, which is the same more with, you know, oxygen, methylation, inflammation. All these things kind of can cause mutations and issues and aging. And I mean, you know, I don't want to get too technical in the basics or all that sort of thing, but essentially, you know, we have chromosomes. On the end of each chromosome is something called a telomere. Those telomeres create new cells when old cells have died. And when you have less telomeres, you have the same amount of input stress on a smaller number of cells. That's why people seem to age quickly as they get older. That's also why it's kind of folly to think, oh, okay, I'm younger, you know, I can go out and get drunk and there's no effect. Yeah, of course, there's no sort of systemic cataclysmic kind of effect, which is more of an issue when you have more less sort of cells for damage to be spread over, because you can get more inflammation. But you're still burning away your sort of base unit of cells, which is finite. You can only reproduce a cell so many times in your lifetime before that telomere is gone. So you still kind of bringing that time sooner. Excuse me?
Is that the Hayflick limit? Is that what you're talking about?
Yes. Essentially, you can only, each chromosome, each telomere can only reproduce a new cell so many times. Once that telomere stub has been run down to the bottom by, you know, can only produce so many cells, it's done, it can't produce any more cells, and then the same amount of stress is distributed over the other cells. And then as time goes on, you know, whatever kind of stresses you have on your organism is going to be spread over less cells. So the key, or, you know, one of the main things of life extension, sort of the Cron people, is about reducing the cellular damage. So, okay, so that's a sort of established, you know, there's all sorts of, you know, that you can go off on that, but I just want to kind of move on a little bit into fasting and the conclusions that come from there. So essentially, when you fast, right, you're able to reduce the stress on your cells, right? Because you have less input, digestion, absorption. These are the things that cause the most stress, the most damage. Why? Because essentially, you know, if you're eating bad food, if you're eating unhealthy food, that's going to obviously cause problems for you, and that's kind of the gateway. In the cell, in the gut, you have these cells called etherealites. So these cells line the gut, and they are the barrier between the outside world and the inside world as far as what you eat. These cells encapsulate molecules that come into the gut, and they determine whether or not that thing is healthy or not, whether it's a toxin or whether it's something you want or whether it's something you don't want. And it will either absorb it or kick it out, right? So over time, those etherealites, if you have a lot of toxins coming into your system, age. You know, there's a saying, all disease starts in the gut. It's kind of linked to this because they are the first line of defense. And in fact, you know, if you have inflammation in the gut, then you're going to have inflammation elsewhere in the body. When you have leaky gut or some kind of gap in your gut, and those molecules enter the system, the bloodstream, unregulated, and then your body will attack them. And that's kind of one of the major causes of these diet-driven degenerative diseases that we have, you know, arthritis, diabetes, cancer, you know, perhaps autism, some would argue. And so this is kind of the point here, is that there's a link between your gut and your immune health and your inflammation. The etherolytic, the turnover of the etherolyte cells is the highest of any turnover in the body. So these cells are reproduced at a faster rate. So it's another reason why the gut is so important in your health. So one thing that people do is they fast, right? So fasting has another process that a lot of people know about, which is called autophagy or autophagy. I don't know, I've only ever read it. And essentially what this is that when your body starts to run out of glucose, okay, and you know, it will tend to move towards ketone bodies, which is essentially fatty acids, and it will repurpose those. And it will also start to metabolize muscles. And the key to this is that the weaker muscles, the more damaged muscles, will be metabolized first. So if you have tumorous cells, if you have different issues, and these foods, these tissues within your body will be dealt with, you will expel toxins and you will kind of improve your health. And that's a great benefit of fasting. It upregulates your entire system. It optimizes your hormonal system. You know, it has a lot of benefits. But, and this is the thing, it's obviously less calories most of the time, and this causes you to down-regulate your metabolism. You might lose muscle. You might kind of just not be able to get back to the same metabolic rate that you once had, and that's not everything. But if you want performance, optimal performance, optimal cognition, you know, fertility, there are some downsides to entering into a sort of a heavy autophagy state. So the key is to, in my kind of personal approach, is to try to stack some of the benefits of fasting. So yes, I will still do, you know, eating windows when I'm fasting, which means I will kind of not eat for 16 hours and just eat during a small period of the day. Yeah, I will do sort of fruit fast sometimes. Yeah, I will do a water fast for a few days. Essentially, first of all, we know that autophagy can exist in some level without having to fast completely, although it's, you know, it's not enough on its own to replace. The other thing is that if you can reduce the cellular turnover of what you're eating, okay, of your cells, then you are going to have a much higher rate of vitality. You're going to have a much lower rate of cell turnover. You're going to have less inflammation, less instances of glycation, less instances of oxidation or methylation going wrong. You know, just to take a break from the nerdy stuff for a second, look at bodybuilders. You know, they are kind of operating at the extreme end of the kind of the metabolic process. They're kind of eating a huge amount of calories, and they eat things like protein powder. So when you eat protein powder, usually the serving sizes are way beyond what the actual ability, what the actual capacity for a body to absorb protein is, even for these sort of units, these huge guys. But they still get a result when they eat more because it's so inabsorbable. The form of a protein powder is so difficult to absorb. They only absorb a percentage of it. They have to eat a lot more. It causes they get more protein into their bodies, but they're also having, you know, a lot of stress on cells. Bodybuilders have pretty high toilet paper bills, you know, so all that inefficiency is causing a lot of cellular turnover, higher inflammation, and you know, it's not a balanced health thing. So the idea is to look at it from like a cost-benefit ratio. What's the cost of what the calorie I'm eating versus the benefit of the nutrients that I'm absorbing? So the idea is to try to stack the benefits of fasting by not having to, the beyond autophagy, excuse me, because it's like, imagine you have a lot of paperwork, okay? At the bottom of that stack of paperwork is something you really need to get to. However, the body can't put processing, digesting food off. It has to, you know. So every time you get to the bottom of that paperwork, a new bunch of paperwork comes back. You never get to the bottom. You're never able to do this sort of essential repair and maintenance work, right? And you also just have much more inefficiency. So what we want to do is kind of, is kind of get as much nutrition absorbed out of what we're eating per calorie, by the stress, by the cellular turnover. And that goes beyond simple autophagy. So what the key, you can encapsulate it in this phrase, I think. So people, obviously we know that weight loss essentially is you have to burn more calories than you consume, right? You have to burn more calories than you consume. However, it goes a level, I think the real truth is perhaps a little bit further than that. The key, more important metric is how much nutrition do you absorb per calorie? Because, for example, let's say you're eating, white flour, you're eating sort of denatured, rancid cooking oils, which is what most people do all the time. Then not only are you not getting any nutrition because they're completely devoid of micronutrients, enzymes, you're also having to go through a lot of stress and work to absorb those nutrients. And in fact, most of the time when you eat foods in their natural state, the more bioavailable they are, the more kind of co-nutrients are in those foods to enable you to absorb them. Most people don't know that it actually costs minerals and vitamins in order to absorb food. So, and they're usually in the right ratios, synthesized in the right way to be able to absorb them. So if you have an entirely denatured food that is already difficult to absorb and doesn't offer anything, you have to spend, you end up in a debt, a nutrition debt. And that's why that's why people who eat a lot of sugar, one of the reasons, obviously one reason is acid and plaque. That's why they have bad teeth, because they have to pull the nutrition and the minerals to absorb those denatured foods out of their teeth and out of their bones. So that would be the extreme to avoid. And if you can go as far as you can the other direction, you want to try to absorb more nutrition per calorie eaten. And so later I want to get into kind of maybe some strategies to do that. But one of the ways is you can increase your internal bioavailability, is kind of one way of saying it. You improve your body's ability to be able to absorb food. You might do that by sort of eating a lot of broth to increase the capacity of your gut. If you could find a food that is very easy to absorb, has a large amount of absorbable nutrition, and actually increases your ability to absorb, then you can get to a point where you're eating a lot of food. Let's say you're eating a small amount of food than you were before, but you're putting on more muscle and you're aging slower. So everything that you do in the valuable real estate of your stomach is doing something. So this process is kind of like something that I've been using for a long time, and it really has helped me a lot in terms of recovery time. I don't know about fertility, I haven't tested it, but that's kind of the basic outline. And I want to maybe later get into more tactics and sort of Western pricey stuff. But just wanted to open it up there.
Cool. I want to hear about your N=1 fertility test later, but I've got a lot to say on this topic. It's something I've done a lot of research on. So I'm sure a lot of us have. And like you kind of said, I think nutrition for like performance versus longevity is probably one of the biggest mistakes people make, because they look at all these athletes and bodybuilders and think, yeah, that's the picture of health, and that's kind of what Men's Health and mainstream is selling, and is often the opposite for longevity in terms of what your body can handle and the stress you're putting on it. It's kind of like you mentioned, the bodybuilders just burning through their bodies faster and things like that. Um, and then it's interesting that the topic was nutrition for longevity, but actually it's the absence of food and the fasting that makes a lot of this work better in terms of like digestion, how well you can absorb nutrients. So I think you kind of hit the nail on the head. The other myth is like calorie counting, and people just think, oh, if I count calories and I'm consuming less than I burn, then I'm going to lose weight. But it really doesn't work like that when it comes to metabolism. And that's the other big mistake people make, is they can often crash their metabolism just by cutting calories. And then the calories they do eat are so low in nutrition that they're not getting what they need, and they end up depleting their minerals and vitamins and enzymes. And that all has like a cascading effect on just crashing the metabolism. So that's probably the other biggest myth in basic nutrition, is this whole calorie counting. But in terms of like absorption of nutrients, I think that's probably the biggest issue people have today, is because of things like leaky gut. And like you mentioned, the cell turnover in the gut cells is actually the highest in the body. So that's the first place in the body that loses coherence. And then you see the downstream effect on that in terms of like damage to the gut, and then it not being able to absorb nutrients as well. So I think more and more people are discovering now about gut bacteria, how important they are to digestion. And obviously if you're eating a lot of simple sugars, you completely change the flora in your gut, so you end up with all these overgrowths of weird bacteria, and you get cravings for all kinds of shitty refined food. And that's kind of what again, people have been sucked into that because of modern food scientists designing all these addictive foods. So really that kind of has a massive issue with digestion. You don't have the enzymes, you don't have the gut bacteria you need to absorb more heavy foods, like for example animal fats and meats. People really struggle to absorb the nutrition from those foods if they've been on a vegan diet for long, or they've been eating a lot of sugar. They just don't have the gut bacteria, and they have a leaky gut. So it creates so many issues just in modern society. The other issue that causes leaky gut is to do with incoherent light. So I mean, I'm probably going to do another show on this. I don't want to go too deep maybe on this one, but if you have incoherent light, like from stress, from EMFs and things, people using laptops on their bellies and bowls and things, basically you're going to damage the gut lining, and those cells are going to lose coherence, and then you get leaky gut, and then you get food leaking out of the gut into the blood, and then you get autoimmunity, and then you become allergic to foods. So a lot of these issues people are getting, like allergies and leaky gut, is just because they're getting shitty light in a indoor environment, not enough natural light. And so I think probably light is the most important factor for healing all this stuff. And then fasting, like you said, to kind of heal the damaged cells, because you can pretty much fast for 3 days, and your body will remake all those gut cells, and then you can heal leaky gut, you can heal these allergies. And people think they're stuck with these allergies for life, and just they end up restricting more and more foods, so they can't eat anything because they can't absorb and digest anything, and you get to a really bad place if you go down that road. So I think a lot of what modern science, modern health is teaching is completely leading people down the wrong path of like counting calories, not looking at nutrition density. And that's probably my biggest like aha moment, was just, okay, let's look at the nutrition of all these foods. What am I getting out of it versus what is it taking? Like you said, if you're eating a lot of flour or refined foods, you're basically pulling nutrients out of your body. And again, that's just robbing your body over time. So really understanding that interaction. And then in terms of like longevity, like what you said, Ollie, about all the metabolic processes, basically everything has a cost. Every time you're digesting something, every time your body's doing something, there's a waste product. And so the body needs to be able to repair that. Otherwise the cells get damaged, and the DNA mutation happens, and then you have to replace that cell. So then that is where aging comes in, because that repair mechanism is not working in the body. So what you mentioned about autophagy and fasting, that's a huge part of how the body cleans up and repairs, stopping inflammation so it doesn't get out of control. If you have a lot of inflammation, you have a lot of senescent cells, basically is these dead cells that stop working properly. The body can't clean them out, and they just spread more inflammation and aging. So that again causes a lot of stress. A lot of fat people have these issues of like the body's just full of like dead senescent cells, and they're kind of starved of nutrition, but they're just eating empty refined foods. And so they're not actually, they're not actually even, they're like malnourished basically. They're like starving people, but they're like they look big, which is what Moritz was saying in the chat. So that's kind of, again, like looking at someone from the outside, you just assume that their weight you know, is the most important thing to look at. But if you look at their nutrition and their biomarkers, you'll see they're probably depleted of a bunch of vitamins and minerals and enzymes. So like biomarkers is huge probably to gain awareness, like individually for us. I'll probably do another show on that because you can go quite deep into that. But yeah, I think you touched on a lot of things. So there's a lot of different directions we can go in. I don't want to get too technical either. It depends on what the guys here want to chat about. But yeah, I think Lynn had his hand raised, so I'll hand over to him.
Yes, Ollie, thanks. I mean, I've seen this, but I like the way you put it together. Thanks. I know a lot more about autophagy now, or phagy, than how to pronounce it without offending someone. Couple questions I've got briefly. One, you mentioned, say, there's certain kind of foods that are more nutrient, like dense and beneficial to, I guess, the body and the gut and enabling repair. I could probably guess about what a bunch of them are, but what I want to know specifically, if it could help, is what ones could be, I don't know, probably geography like dependent, but what's easiest to access that requires as little preparation time as possible, you can just eat it raw. That's the first one. What kind of things would you like 2 or 3 that are quick and easy to grab? And the second one, how can you identify, this is to everyone, how can you identify if you have a leaky gut without, say, like going to a doctor or something? So yeah, cheers.
Okay. Well, there's a few foods that you can eat. Top ones for me are bone broth, grass-fed butter, fermented vegetables like kimchi or sauerkraut, raw egg yolks, fermented raw dairy products, and actually fruit, because a lot of people don't like fruit. But the thing about fruit is that, you know, most of the fructose studies were done on isolated and unrealistically large quantities of fructose, and when you eat fruit in a whole form on an empty stomach, the cost-benefit ratio of absorption is pretty decent, because it's very easy to absorb and it shouldn't spike your blood sugar, depending on the fruit.
Sure.
So there are some of the main ones that I would eat, and then if you want to expand from there, I would say, you know, liver, a lot of seafood, but you really have to be very careful about animal food. And spirulina is a great one as well, because it's very, very absorbable, because it has a lot of chlorophyll in it, which is kind of what makes plants green, kind of concentrated bioavailable sunlight in some ways. But it normally, plants have cellulose in them, which makes them very difficult to absorb. Yeah. Spirulina is actually an organism, like some kind of bacteria, some kind of microorganism. And so it doesn't have that. So it's very easy to absorb, and it doesn't have that stress. As for leaky gut, I mean, it's kind of, it can be difficult to tell. You know, it's often kind of a downstream issue. If a lot of people have flare-ups of kind of skin stuff, rheumatoid arthritis, one of the easiest ways to tell is that they just have a really bad digestion. You know, they get diarrhea very easily. They kind of can feel bloated. It can be kind of an indicator of any kind of early degenerative disease issues. Yeah, I think it's something you do want to kind of check out at the doctor.
Cheers. Good, mate.
Yeah, Ollie, what fruits specifically are you talking about are beneficial and don't spike that blood sugar?
I mean, it kind of, first of all, if you're talking about sugar and fruit, it is very personalized. You know, there's a nutrition guy I recommend checking out, the late great Charles Poliquin. He used to say, you know, some people have such bad insulin that they're only allowed to have like 2 licks of a dried prune a fortnight, because if your insulin is in balance, and if you're, let's say, fat adapted and you've been eating, you know, your body is used to going into ketosis, you can handle a lot more kind of natural sugar in that form without spiking your insulin and raising your blood sugar, which is the issue. That said, I would say the ones to avoid are things like, I think, mango, anything that's sort of a lot of high GI foods. Fruits that are better are berries are fantastic. If you can get them, apples are very good, but it's very hard to get kind of clean apples. Same goes for berries. Tropical fruits. I actually like to kind of fry tropical fruits in butter very gently, and that kind of makes them a lot more bioavailable as long as you're doing it at a low enough temperature. That's a nice little hack. You can also make a smoothie, but you have to retain the pulp, and you have to mix it with coconut fat to absorb it. If you throw away all the pulp, maybe you can add a little bit of orange juice if you've made it yourself, but you can't really throw away too much pulp. And that will inhibit the rate at which it hits your blood sugar.
Yeah,
Anyone else?
Yeah, I definitely got a question about that. And what Lynn was asking about the types of foods to eat. A really important point is like food combining, which we haven't really touched on. But basically, your stomach acid digests foods at different pH. So if you eat a bunch of different proteins at the same meal, or you're mixing proteins and fats and carbs, like they always say, eat a simple balanced meal. It's complete bullshit, because all those foods going in your stomach at once nothing's gonna digest optimally. And if you have compromised digestion or leaky gut, you'll notice that you can tolerate monomeals much better, which is eating one type of food at a sitting. So just fruit, or just eggs, or just whatever it is, your body can absorb and digest that much better. So in terms of pulling the most nutrition out of a calorie or out of a food, that's probably the cleanest way to eat. And it's a little bit bland for some people if they're so used to eating all these complex flavors. But actually, when you fasted and you reset your sort of palate, you can enjoy those foods quite simply. So just like a monomeal of fruit, or a monomeal of eggs, or whatever it is, and not mixing too many animal fats and proteins in the same meal can really help with digestion. So that's the first thing. And around leaky gut, if you have chronic inflammation, you can measure your CRP. It's a very easy biomarker. You can probably see that you have some kind of issue there. If you have chronic inflammation, it's one of the main signs of leaky gut. If you're bloated after a meal, you have to sit there for ages and digest, or you get tired. These are all signs that there's probably inflammation going on after a meal. So definitely stripping out having too many complex combinations in a single meal. I would say keep it simple. And then around fruit specifically, I really gone back and forth on this. Like, I've done raw vegan, I've done paleo. So I've gone through times eating a lot of fruit and the times of no fruit. And what I found, because I've traveled a lot as well, when I'm in the tropics, obviously fruit is seasonally available all year round. And in that environment, your body can absorb fruit much, much better. If you're in a cold country, like in London in winter, I don't really think it's optimal to eat fruit at all, because it's not something that would be in your environment. And obviously today in supermarkets, you can get everything all year round, but that's not how the body's designed. If you look at like what the body uses as cues for circadian rhythm, you have like food signals, heat signals, and light signals. And so if it's cold in your environment and dark in your environment, but you're eating fruit, it's like you're telling your body it's summer, even though it's not. And you're going to really confuse the body. You can cause loads of issues eating like lots of sugar and fruit in the winter. And again, have all kinds of like havoc on your digestion. So a lot of people don't really understand those things. If you are going to eat fruit, eat it in summer and eat it as a monomeal. Don't like mix it after a heavy meal, when you're going to, again, introduce multiple foods and then everything digests sort of suboptimally because the pH isn't right. That I would say that's my main points. As far as like fruit in general, again, like a lot of it's been hybridized. If you look at like natural fruit in the wild versus what we find today in supermarkets, it's just made sweeter and sweeter. It's more and more sugar. And also because the soil is depleted today, there's less and less nutrition. So the amount of like, vitamins and minerals in an orange 50 years ago versus what you find today, it's a fraction. So basically most fruits don't have the ROI, in my opinion, unless they're grown naturally on like rich soil, which you might find in the tropics and you might find in some places like the Azores has really good volcanic soil. So it's really important to understand that where your food is coming from. If the farmer is using pesticides and fertilizers and the soil is depleted, probably that food's not even worth it. Like you said, it's hard to find clean apples, clean berries, precisely because of this. A lot of fruit is just super polluted and use a lot of pesticides, but also the soil is depleted, and that's why they have to use those things to make them grow. But there's very little actual nutrition in those foods now. So I would say really understand the source. Things like fruit, my favorite fruit is figs, which is interesting because it's like a fruit that's been around for thousands of years, hasn't been hybridized, has tons of minerals, it's super nutrient dense as far as fruit goes. So that's my personal favorite, and I eat that a lot. I don't have any issues with that. It seems to work really well for me. You can buy it dried and it's not sprayed. You get it pretty organic in Portugal and Turkey, and it's imported, pretty much everywhere. So that's one of my favorite foods. And yeah, I mean, figs and honey, it's these kind of biblical foods. If you find something that's been non-hybridized and non-sort of contaminated by humans, those tend to have the most nutrition. And again, figs are just out capturing sunlight all day long, and all you're eating with food is condensed light. which is again another topic we can touch on. But basically, you know, your body absorbs energy from a lot of places, and the other issue people have is they're trying to get their energy all from food because they're not able to make it from light. And if you look at how a body makes ATP, which is the energy of every cell that runs the body, you make it primarily from infrared light. And if you don't have enough infrared light from the sun, you end up using food as a backup source. And so people just get kind of eating and overeating and causing more metabolic waste and aging faster because they're using food as their primary source of fuel for energy, when actually it's really more for biomass. In the context of when you're outside more and getting more light, you make way more ATP from infrared light than you can never make from food. And so the biggest cost is actually not getting that light, not getting that ATP from sunlight, and then having to make it from food. And then obviously you're just constantly digesting, constantly, you know, using up your cells. So that's a huge topic. We can go into that as well, but I'll hand over to Moritz. He's got something to say.
Yeah, while you guys were talking about the leaky gut problem, I know somebody in a company that I work with who did a fecal transplant. So he had a problem with his digestion, with his gut, and so the sort of last option that you have, if you're not able to fix that by yourself and you don't have the bacteria yourself in your gut, you can get a fecal transplant, like get it from somebody who has those good bacteria. Actually, there's very much variability between humans of what kind of bacteria and how much of them they have in their gut, and so especially it's influenced also by your parents and how they were constituted during your birth and then also growing up. So some people don't actually start off with a very good starting point in a sense for bacteria in your gut. And so there are ways to change and increase that. And I guess the most powerful or sort of intense intervention would be that kind of transplant.
Yeah, that's pretty extreme. I've heard about Dave Asprey talking about that, and he's quite keen on that. I think it can be useful in a really extreme sort of medicinal situation where you've really compromised your health, like you said. It's probably quite expensive. I don't know whose poo I would trust to insert up there, but maybe I'll sell mine one day when I hack my diet. But yeah.
It's a story that you don't want floating around about you. So.
You can take it orally or as a suppository, Michael. So you have some choice there.
Great. Thanks for that, Ollie. Yeah, no, I think I'll pass on that. But I think the issue why people's gut bacteria, or their fecal bacteria is compromised, again comes to like the foods you're eating. If you eat a lot of simple sugars and refined foods, you completely change the balance in your gut bacteria and your flora and your colon. So that all gets messed up when you're just eating too much sugar and refined foods. And then you can correct it, but it takes time. And so I think most people just don't understand how to do that. But yeah, it's a huge issue. I think you can get Ubiome now, like it's a company that does like a home gut bacteria test. And you can actually see like the richness or diversity of gut bacteria to see if it's super simple or you actually have enough variety, which again helps massively with digestion. So I did a test recently, and it came back fairly average, nothing amazing, nothing too bad. But it was interesting just to kind of see these kind of home tests are available now. So if you suspect you have an issue there, you can also test. But yeah, go on, Lynn.
Two things. What's the name of that test?
The company's called Ubiome. I think it was in America. I'm not sure if they do in Europe as well. Maybe.
Perfect. Cheers, mate. And second one, I guess to everyone as well, to Ollie as well. I guess regarding access to water, I know Mike has some opinions on how to get access to water. But I mean, if maybe you can't get access to these good quality vegetables or foods where you can get a lot of the hydration there. Say using a tap, there's certain things or ways that you found or the families have known over the years to better treat, like say, your government juice, your tap water, so that you can consume it and still protect yourself from all the funny stuff that's in there.
Yeah, this is another. Go on, Ollie, if you want to take this one. I was going to say it's basically one of those massive conspiracy theories that people talk about. It's like, oh my God, they're putting fluoride in the water, and honestly, there's just so much shit in tap water that it's not just the fluoride. But if you look at how these systems work, basically recycling water, it's like whatever you flush down the toilet ends up back in the tap, and so a lot of stuff's not filtered out. So they've found there's basically antibiotic residues, there's synthetic hormones like birth control pills that get flushed down the toilet, whatever's getting flushed down there. And obviously in the city, it's a lot more contaminated than out in the country. That's going to end up back in your water, in your tap. So there's no really good ways that I found that takes everything out. Like people get these really expensive chlorine filters, fluoride filters, and that can take out a lot of the shit. You can actually test also with a TDS meter, which is like test the total dissolved solids in water. So you just get tap water, pour it in a cup, and then put this meter in, and you can see the parts per million as to how contaminated it is. So I've done this in London, where obviously the taps and the whole sewage system is, hundreds of years old, super dirty and disgusting, and shit is just lead is falling off the pipes, everything's going to the water, and you can see the parts per million is like 300 plus, which is like disgusting. You compare that to like a city like Singapore, which obviously the sewage system is much newer, and everything is a bit better. It's something that's more like 70, 80 parts per million. So it's slightly cleaner, but you still have the issue of all the birth control pills, antibiotics being flushed down the toilet that modern filters, just the filtration systems don't take out. That stuff still ends up in the water, and you end up basically drinking antibiotics and drinking all this shit you just don't want in your body. So the only way that I found that I feel is fairly bulletproof in terms of tap water is using a distiller, which is basically you're turning the water into steam vapor and then condensing it back into water. And you can see all the shit that's in the bottom of the tank of the distiller after you've done that a few cycles. It's just disgusting, all the stuff that's left there, basically. So if you test with a TDS meter, you'll see the total dissolved solids back to zero once you've done that. So you just got pure H2O in the water. But then again, you've got basically almost dead water, which energetically, it's not like spring water, which you want to basically get something as close to spring water as possible, which has the sort of properties of life in terms of like electromagnetic charge. So if you look at those properties of spring water, that's the sort of optimal hydration for your body. And so you can kind of remineralize and restructure the water with different tools. It's a little bit nerdy, so I don't know how deep I want to get into it, but basically, yeah, you've got the distiller as the first step. If you want to clean up tap water, and then you remineralize and restructure it to make it more like spring water. But the other option is just to get your hydration from plants. So I actually eat a lot of cucumbers sometimes when I can't get good spring water, or I also avoid plastic bottles, because that's pretty stupid. If you look at like people are trying to take out tap water, but then they're drinking plastics through the bottled water. So I tend to go for glass bottled water, or I go for like plants. If I'm in Asia, obviously I can eat more fruits because it's seasonal, and that hydration from plants is optimal, because again, the cellular structure is just optimized for hydration. So when you eat that, you're going to get hydrated. And the other issue is just avoiding really refined foods that dehydrate you, because then you're going to get more thirsty and dehydrated. So it's that balance of like hydration. And again, like exposure to sunlight charges the water in your cells much like it does in fruit. So again, if you want to charge your water in your body to hydrate your cells, sunlight is probably the best thing for that, and then you're not dehydrated. So there's a lot of factors there, but yeah, tap water, pretty disgusting in my opinion. I don't know, Ollie, what do you think?
Me? I think you answered it pretty comprehensively there. I was going to say you can leave it out overnight. Sometimes that will evaporate some of the chlorine and stuff. But yeah, there's no real way around kind of tap water. It's just horrendous, all the things that are in there. And yeah, I think obviously you can remineralize it. There's a lot of funky dunky sort of science out there about kind of structuring the water and stuff like that may or may not work, but there is definitely something to it, to the negative and positive charge, I think, with water. But that's not really something I've gotten into too much. But another thing you can do is just put a tiny bit of sea salt into your water if you have clean water. And then, same principle, you can absorb more, and you don't have to process as much, because your cells are going to hold on to it a little bit because it's isotonic.
Yeah, it's a really good point. They've measured the conductivity of water. Like distilled water obviously has no minerals in it, so there's no conductivity, and that's essentially the issue of putting like dead water into your body, is you're not going to have that conductivity. Like your body is an electric machine, so you need that conductivity. And so if you add a bit of salt water, you add a bit of even just like lemon slice or cucumber slice, that can remineralize the water and really help it digest better, absorb better.
Yeah, I think definitely getting into. We should probably do a whole episode on like light and sort of mitochondrial health. And I think you, Michael, definitely know a lot more about that than I do. I think one thing, to go back to the fruit point again, food tastes better when it's from a sunny country. And if you're eating fruit in the wintertime, you're not necessarily going to be kind of in tune with nature, or in tune with the kind of the cues your body's getting from the environment. And the more I kind of look into nutrition, the more I realize it's kind of a large part of it is how much sun is in the food. So when you eat organ meats from these animals, you're actually kind of getting the nutrition that they have concentrated. They have a digestive system for eating these sort of grass and all these sort of chlorophyll foods. The reason these foods are green is because that's the one part of the light spectrum that they can't metabolize. That's why plants turn green. So these animals are super adapted to sustaining themselves just off that, and then they sustain themselves from that. And then once you then turn into sort of eating their bodies, you're able to get a lot of the nutrition, like the vitamin D, E, A, K2, and I think you don't have to have fruit. Absolutely not. I also think. Well, did anyone else have any more questions about that stuff or comments? No. Okay. So I just wanted to touch on the Weston Price stuff a bit more. So Weston Price, he was this dentist in sort of the 20s and 30s from America, and what he did is he traveled all around the world and visited all these sort of indigenous tribes. He visited them all. He had African tribes, Maoris, Aborigines, Eskimos, Native Americans, even some remote villages in Switzerland and Scotland. And he noticed a lot of similarities in the way that they ate food. And they had outstanding health. I think we really do believe that people kind of have a much too low standard of the health that we can have. And I think that the sort of agricultural revolution that we had makes people think that we used to live for a much shorter period. If you actually look at how the bodies of sort of ice age, pre-agricultural people, then they lived for a long time. They lived much longer than people 700 years ago, and they were very healthy. And these tribes were kind of still living in that time. They ate a lot of animal meats. They ate foods. They ate a lot of seafood. They fermented their food, and these ways of life are basically gone now. And so, if you compare it to something like paleo, which is fine, but the way that people get the data from that is through carbon dating and stuff like this. And he was pretty comprehensive for a 1930s kind of. I guess he was just a dentist, but he was fairly rigorous in his approach. And so I think it's still a pretty good kind of data set of, even if it might be slightly anecdotal, of an effective way to sort of eat, because these people had refined it over a very long period of time. They didn't have these medicines that we have today, and they were still doing pretty well. So I do think that if you can focus, and they all followed the same principle as well, of eating foods that kind of absorbed a lot of sunlight. They were all very good at eating foods that were easy to absorb, and that's what I think about that.
Yeah, he did some good studies, some good work, and I think he was actually studying the Swiss kids in these villages, and where they hadn't yet imported like refined foods, and they were eating pretty much raw milk and the very like nutrient dense foods, and their teeth were amazing, their health was amazing. And then he actually went to different villages where they started importing more refined and processed foods, and already their teeth had started to deteriorate and their health had started to fail. So so that was like a huge indicator, and that was like 100 years ago, that how the world was changing, how nutrition was changing. But yeah, a lot of these foods just aren't available today. You go to the supermarket, you can't even find raw milk because they made it illegal, because basically when you have industrial agriculture and you're packing a lot of animals into a small space, there's going to be a lot of disease and germs, and you can't really have raw milk without a lot of germs in it. So the modern food systems just aren't designed for health. They're designed for kind of cost. And obviously, if you pasteurize something on the shelf, it lasts much longer. If it's raw, it's going to go off sooner. So companies, can't make as much money. And a lot of the food you find today is just kind of pasteurized. A lot of the enzymes and minerals and vitamins are missing for digestion. So that's how people end up getting depleted, because they're trying to digest those foods without the natural factors that you'd find when they weren't refined. And probably dairy is a big example of that. Weston Price did a lot of research on that. So yeah, it's massive.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people are vegan today, and I think a large part of that is because the meat and the dairy, the animal products are so poor. People, and I think you've said this before as well, Michael. Like, people will stop eating animal foods and they'll feel way better. But the thing is vegetable foods are kind of, I heard it said, vegetable foods are cleansing foods and animal foods are nourishing foods. And I think that's a pretty good way of putting it, because you just cannot absorb the nutrients that you need. So, like, for example, vitamins A, D, E, K2, these are all fat soluble vitamins, right? So if you're gonna eat these foods in isolation and mix them with an oil, which is the only way that you could absorb them, yes, you're going to absorb some of these foods. Yes, you're going to kind of get some of it into your system. And of course, if you have more sunlight, you need less vitamin D. But first of all, they work synergistically. They work in balance to one another, especially vitamin A and D. And so if you are able to eat them in a form that has the fat, has different nutrients in them, different vitamins in them, in one package, you're going to absorb way more. You're going to have way less stress. And so, now you have like even the carnivore diet, where people are kind of really running around just eating meat and even just eating muscle meat all the time. But one of the issues that people have that I think isn't really talked about enough is the fact that the quality of this meat, even though they can absorb the nutrients in a package because they have all the codependent kind of elements there, it's so difficult to get good quality animal food. It's really hard, even if it's organic, is it actually pastured, which changes the vitamin profile completely. It's kind of vaccinated and entirely unregulated scale. So what else is happening? It's full of hormones and stuff like this. So, one of the things that I do when I'm advising people is I always try to get them to start from the other side of nutrition, from the metabolic kind of stuff, the bodybuilder paradigm. More protein, high metabolism. That's at the extreme end. That's kind of the manifestation side. You have certain things that depends on. If your hormones are not working well, then your metabolism isn't going to work well. If your gut isn't working well, then your hormonal system isn't going to work well either, because your hormones are synthesized in the gut, and you have a lot of these bacteria that do the synthesizing for you in the gut. And your mitochondrial health is involved in that as well, and that's also related to gut health. And you won't be able to do that if your toxins are too high. If your toxic load, which is the amount of toxins coming into you through your diet and your environment, then you're not going to be able to actually reduce your inflammation low enough. You're not going to be able to, you're always going to have that paperwork problem where you're always chasing that last piece of paperwork underneath, and you're going to have systemic inflammation, So what you have is your body will always protect the internal organs as a first priority. It will let your arms and legs drop off before it allows a relatively small amount of damage to happen to them. So when you have a lot of fat in your system, and when you are eating a lot of animal fat, which is actually where a lot of these fat-soluble vitamins are located, your body will quarantine them in the fat, and so will the sick animals that you're eating. So it leaves you in a bit of a quandary. So, when people go on these diets, when people just go on a calorie starvation diet, what happens is the body wants to even go ketogenic, which means burning more fat, but it can't do this because essentially the fat on its body is unpalatable to itself. It doesn't want to eat it. And so what you have to do first is you have to get rid of all that stuff. You have to get rid of all those toxins. You have to, that's why reducing the stress, the overall stress, is a very useful thing, because it allows you to, the overall stress of absorption. because it allows you to stack the benefits of that fasting, you know. So I do think that there's a bit of an issue with this kind of a modern sort of paleo, ancestral, carnivore diet thing, because it's just going to be a short-term benefit for so many people, because it's very, very, very difficult to actually get quality animal food. I don't know. So I was wondering Michael, what do you do about that? I know you're living in Portugal now. You eat a lot of raw dairy, I guess.
Yeah, well, it depends. So in Portugal right now, it's just coming out of winter into spring. So actually, there isn't that much raw dairy around. I did ask some of the local goat farmers, and they basically reserve it for the kid goats, you know, to get through the winter. So then in spring into summer, there's obviously more of that available. So I think, again, seasonally, it makes more sense to drink raw milk during the summer. And again, as you get into winter, there's probably more animal fats and proteins. So like seafood, for example, is something that's really abundant here, and it's just great quality because they catch it locally. So again, so many parts of the food chain are compromised when it comes to animals, and you know, same for seafood. A lot of salmon is farmed, and people think salmon's healthy, but they're just feeding it corn and soy and GMO feed half the time, putting colors in there to make it look like it's red, but that is some of the sickest fish you'll ever eat, and they mark it up and make it look pretty in the supermarket, and you know, people think, yeah, I'm eating salmon, I'm healthy. So I think their fish and seafood is probably one of the best sources of nutrition if you can find it clean. And there's places like Portugal, that's kind of why I'm moving here, is because it's just really good sources, and it's super local, super fresh. You know, things like sardines and smaller fish that don't have the bioaccumulation of mercury and things like larger fish have. So I don't eat a lot of tuna and swordfish, but smaller fish like sardines, I think is fine. And yeah, seafood, you know, mussels I do eat, octopus, you know, there's really a good variety here. So I think the body knows how to use those foods, and I think purely eating muscle meats without the fats over time, you'll have issues, just because, like you said, a lot of the nutrition is in the fats. So the problem is, again, the fats tend to concentrate a lot of the shit in a sick animal. So if you're eating grain-fed indoor sick animals and you eat the fats, you're probably not, you don't want to do that. You probably want to take out the fat and just eat the lean meat. But the grass-fed meat and the really healthy animals, you want to be eating the fat, because that's where a lot of nutrition is. So I think that's where people get really confused with all these diets. It's like, do I eat the fat? Do I not eat the fat? You basically want to find a healthy animal, a healthy source of, you know, animal fats and proteins, and just really avoid the sort of toxic sources, because again, like organ meats is probably one of the most amazing sources of nutrition, but if you get it from a sick grain-fed animal, you probably don't want to be eating the organs, because that's, again, where a lot of stuff will get, you know, stored and quarantined. So that's the real sort of nuance of it, is like, find healthy sources, go find local farmers, you know, go to your farmers markets, trying to find out what they're feeding their animals. That's going to make a huge difference. And you don't need to eat like a lot of animal fat, like you say, or protein. Like people say it's expensive, you know, grass-fed this, grass-fed that every day. Obviously, you can't maybe afford those foods every day, but if you just get a good quality source of organ meats once or twice a week, like liver, you know, that's something basic. Our parents used to always make sure they feed us, and we just totally forgotten these habits or these traditions. But you get that once or twice a week, you get so many vitamins and minerals, and the nutrient density is so high, that's going to help fill a lot of gaps in the rest of your diet, you know, because, you know, everything else maybe isn't as nutrient dense. So I think those kind of tips is more practical for people. I think we've talked about so many things on this show today, but like, if you just condense it into practical tips, what can people actually do? That's probably the main thing. You know, go to farmers markets, go ask them what they're feeding, try and stay away from like grain-fed animals, farmed fish, farmed, you know, animals, because they're basically sick at the end of the day. There's very little nutrition in there. And when you do get a healthy source, you don't even need to eat that much of it. A couple times a week is enough. And I think people are overeating largely because they're deficient in sunlight. So like I was saying earlier, your body makes energy and ATP from infrared light. If it doesn't have that from sunlight, it tries to get it from food. And then that just causes, you know, you're going to be hungry all the time. You're going to have more metabolic waste and byproduct waste from all those processes of digestion. And that's just going to age the body and stress the body over time. So really a big part of nutrition is actually understanding, you know, light, is a really important part of diet. The animals that are under the most light, like outdoors, grass-fed animals, they're absorbing sunlight all day. The grass they're eating is really rich, and so it's going to be a completely different type of quality of like milk or meat you're eating than if you eat from an animal that's raised indoors. And that's pretty much all the produce in supermarkets today because of industrial agriculture. So if you just do a little bit of research into Weston Price, you'll really start to see a lot of these issues that we're talking about and why they start to recommend, grass-fed butter, grass-fed fats and proteins, because that's just where the nutrition is. So the animals know how to condense that from plants. If you eat plants directly, we don't really have the same stomachs as cows. We can't really digest and absorb those nutrients. Like you said earlier, the cellulose and things, plants have a lot of anti-nutrients and things that block digestion. So I would say that plant foods are pretty catabolic and animal foods are pretty anabolic. That's another way of looking at it in the sort of fasting feasting cycle. So when you eat a lot of plant foods, it can be very cleansing because your body goes into catabolism. But if you do that for a period of weeks and months and years, like vegans do, you end up really crashing your metabolism. And the body really needs saturated fat to make the hormones to, do those things we were talking about. And if you look at some of the stresses in the modern environment, why our bodies are getting depleted, is because a lot of these things are getting used up faster. So when you have more stress, your body's making more cortisol, which means it's burning through these precursors like the cholesterol, the saturated fat that you need to make hormones gets used up faster in a stressful environment. So if you can reduce those stresses, again, you need to eat less, you need to have less of those things. But if you're just doing everything at a faster pace because the world's moving faster, you need to make sure you have that solid base of nutrition, because you don't have the saturated fat and you're trying to go vegan to save the planet or something crazy like that, you're just going to have damaging your body. And this is huge crazes. People are coming with these amazing diet and ideas that are completely untested and trying to do it for ethical reasons, which I kind of understand in a way, but you got to respect your body. You got to know how to test your body. If you don't have a good connection with it and you're not sure, then test. There's biomarkers you can test for some of these things. We'll probably do another show on that, but that's really the first part, to get awareness of where your body's at, where it's low. Check your hormones with the Dutch test, check your blood work, and really get a good idea of where your baseline is, so you know what to work on. Because a lot of people, again, just take tips from experts and like take a supplement, and they're just guessing. They have no N=1. They have no testing to base it off. So they might feel better for a period of time, on a vegan diet, cutting out shitty sick animals, and then they feel worse, and they're like, oh, I don't know what happened. And people are just kind of yo-yoing between diets and all these different gurus, all these different conflicting advice. And every day on the BBC or some article, you'll see a conflicting information on, is this food bad for you? Now it's good for you. Now it's bad for you. And the experts are just as clueless as, the average Joe. So I'd say you need to start testing. There's some really good resources out there. And Weston Price is probably one of the best sort of resources to understand that foundation of health, why you need saturated fat, how your body makes hormones and helps your brain function, and what sort of stresses today are depleting those, so that, you need to make sure you have enough of those in your diet and take out the stresses, so you're not just using up, like people just burn through cortisol all day long because they're under stress, and then they're burned out. So there's a lot of things there. I don't know if any of the other guys have any questions on like practical tips, maybe that's useful for other people.
No. From what I've been hearing so far, I'm making plenty of notes. It's a nice starting point, I think. And obviously, as this progresses, we'll be hearing more and more. And so thanks for that, guys. Pick up a lot of good bits.
Awesome. What about you, Emil? Anything else?
Yeah, I have something to add, because I've been down exactly all the routes you've been talking about. First, I went also paleo, started eating a lot of meat. I think I was about 1 kilo per day. And it was very low quality, with a lot of antibiotics and salt water squirted into it. And I didn't understand why I was getting stronger and stronger, but my health was deteriorating. So I got a lot of protein, I got a lot of muscle, but my gut was not feeling very well from all the antibiotics and all the shit I was eating. And then I thought, like, oh, now I see the golden light. I found the raw vegan path, and I can clean my body. And I did that for a long time, and I definitely felt the effects on the hormones and my mood and everything. And I didn't understand what was going on. I felt healthier physically, while at the same time my health was deteriorating again. So there's so many pitfalls in these diets, and exactly as Michael says, that the experts don't know what they're doing, because they just do like us. They find something that works and they think that'll work forever. So without really researching how everything affects the body, then it's not really going to work. And I just want to take it to a different step with something also I've experienced, especially yesterday, from being outside in the sun. Again, to point out what Michael says, that when you get that amount of sunlight that you actually need, then you feel like the food you'll be eating, you can actually just choose to eat just for the fun of it, because actually it feels like when you're outside in the sun with your bare feet on the ground, doing yoga or Tai Chi, taking in all this universal energy from the sun and the stars and the moon, you feel like you're filling up your body with so much that if you decide to eat, that's great. You decide to enjoy something, and you can do it for not even for to getting satiated or to feel full, just because you really enjoy the taste and you'll be 100% present with it. But it actually seems like you don't need it, but you'll just be adding it. And I think that's what most of Qigong masters and Tai Chi masters and all these people experience when they do that for a very, very long time, even without adding the sunlight in, but just taking in all these universal forces, that they realize, well, I don't have to eat as much anymore. So instead of trying to balance the diet first, if you balance the universal energies, the sunlight and all these things that fill up the prana or the chi or however you want to call it, then then you actually realize by yourself that food is just an external extra source just for the fun of it. And if you charge up on that other stuff first, then you actually don't need much. Same happens with sleep. Same happens with general energy and fatigue and everything. How the muscles work, it feels like the most pure form they can live on is that light. And that's really, really interesting to me, because I felt it during long fasts before, but I just never really put it all together to see like you can actually live without anything and just eat and drink for fun. And it's been written in many old history books and it's in the yogic traditions, but I just never understood it so clearly as I did yesterday, that it's actually possible. And it's because of the light or the universal energy, however you take that in. But the sun and the light is just probably the strongest force. So again, to stress what Michael is saying, if you get enough light, then everything else would just be like an extra source of adding something, but mostly for the fun of it, really. And it's really interesting.
Yep. I think. Go on, Ollie.
I think that, well, I mean, sun gazing and that sort of thing is something I've only gotten into in the last year or two. But I think in general, this approach of one size fits all, I think the future of medicine is about being more customized. And so essentially what I'm thinking when you're saying all this is I always try to refer to nature, like you don't have to necessarily, you have to make it as personalized as possible and just record how you feel, record what results you have. And then you can, because there's so much that if you only go by what is being told by the official narrative, what we currently understand, it's sort of laughable. So if you take it into your own hands, and if you try something, you try the results, see what works for you, for example, then you're going to do much better. And sunlight has a big effect on your mitochondria, and that's kind of the balancer of health. And it's kind of one example of an indirect effect of it just makes everything function better. So if you're able to fast and eat less and just reduce the stress of what you're trying to eat, then the instances of things that go wrong is kind of becoming less and less, and you can refine more and more. I think it's a very exciting field, because I think there'll be more research coming about sunlight and about kind of helping you to improve your mitochondrial health through that, so you can absorb nutrition better with less waste and damage.
Yeah, you're right. It was even BBC News a few weeks, maybe a month ago, about the benefits of sunlight, and basically, maybe Mike posted, I don't remember where I came across it, it correlated lack of sunlight to countries with a lot of, say, like myopia and short eyesight and stuff like that. But yeah, it's pretty. It's on government news. BBC has an interesting surprise.
Yeah, I think it's not in the mainstream yet, like a lot of it, but I think actually we've kind of lost a lot of knowledge. Like in the 1900s and 50s, you used to have like solariums where people used to lie on sunbeds and recover from disease and stuff, and so it was a much more common treatment. But again, this stuff is free. It's not something you can charge money for. So when the medical industry and health industry and food industry is all run for profit, then this kind of stuff tends to get ignored and cut out, edited out of history. And now, obviously, with the internet and communication, it's hard to censor this stuff, so it's more open. But I mean, sun gazing is thousands of years old, goes back before Christianity, before it's one of the oldest sort of religions or pagan beliefs. But there's a reason for it, because the sun creates all life, and without the sun, there is no life. So people have just kind of forgotten that if you take your plants indoors, they die much faster. And if you take animal and stick it in a cell and don't let it out in the wild, it's going to die much faster. And humans are basically the same. We've evolved away from the tropics because we've had to move and adapt to different environments, but it's not optimal. It's just the body's adapted. And so, over time, our genes and our ancestors have obviously dealt with a lot of hardship. But to go back to what's optimal for humans, it's probably much closer to living at the equator in the tropics, and those kind of conditions is what's optimal for life. So now a lot of people living in the northern hemisphere, in the winter, obviously you tend to live indoors, you don't get as much light. And so just over time, what becomes normal around you, you completely forget how maybe humans used to live, a long time ago. And it's been my experience, getting back to the sun, getting back in the tropics, super powerful for your health, just because you make so much energy from infrared. And now the biohackers are out using these infrared devices, on their brains, on their bowls, on their everywhere in between, trying to, get that benefit. But that's just one spectrum of sunlight that, there's so much else going on in the sun we don't understand. And it's not just sun gazing, you have photoreceptors in every cell in your skin, in your body. So your body is just designed to take in light all day long. And if you're not denatured and you're not going to burn, then you can really do that. And so it's the process of coming from wherever you are to trying to get back to that. And obviously the stress of the sun is a very strong radiation. If a lot of people have lived indoors all the time, you can't go straight back out into it. So probably do another show on sun gazing, all the hacks for that, because there's a whole other ball game. But it's a huge part of nutrition. It catalyzes all the other processes in the body. So without that, nothing is going to work as well. And especially mitochondrial health, that's what's coming kind of to the forefront. People like Jack Kruse talking about light a lot more because of the mitochondrial health aspect. And so, the fact you can make ATP from infrared light, you don't even need food. And that's why when you're in the sun, your appetite gets suppressed because your body just doesn't need that source of energy as much. And you can get by on much less calories, much fewer calories. And, if you eat nutrient-dense foods, then you just, you're not wearing the body down because you're not going to get as hungry all the time. So, I think, just practical tips, pretty much question everything the experts are telling you. Look at the FDA food pyramid. It's just complete full of shit. The fruits, vegetables, and grains being at the base of your pyramid, those are all the foods that today, honestly, will make you sick because they have no nutrient density and then the soil is depleted. The grains have a bunch of anti-nutrients, the glyphosate in the wheat that ends up in the bread and everything else, like the beer and the wine. All that stuff irritates your gut, gives you leaky gut. So many Americans have been having problems with that. And, more and more of that stuff's ending up in Europe now just because the food chain's compromised. So you got to really question, what is in this food, not what was in it 50 years ago or 100 years ago when they wrote the textbooks on this stuff. And that's kind of what the FDA is using, very outdated science. These foods are not being prepared properly. They're just being prepared in the most, fast, efficient, profitable way to stick them on the shelves. And then they try and market you and tell you it's a heart healthy diet, get your fiber, get your cereal. It's all full of shit. You just got to question everything because if you're not testing your labs and relying on the experts, that's why everyone's getting sick and everyone's getting, diabetes and all these issues. So it's a huge problem. I'm really passionate about it because there's so much misinformation and I've had to work through a lot of this bullshit to get to some truths. So it's only when you really start testing yourself, then you really start to get a handle on where you're at. And like Ollie said, it's personalized for everyone because everyone's got different genes, living in different environments with different health issues and different baseline. So you really have to test for yourself and not just follow this fad diet and then that fad diet and say, oh, I feel good now, I don't feel good. That's sort of, I think, the path that we've all kind of been through to get some answers. But yeah, the FDA food pyramid, if you just flip that, invert that the other way around, look at what's on the top of that, it's animal fats and proteins. And that's what you should be getting more of your nutrition from in terms of nutrient density per calorie. There's just way more in there that the animals have absorbed from you, from the sunlight and from, from plant foods that we can't get as much nutrition from ourselves. We don't have that, we don't have those stomachs. We don't have that time to graze for 8, 10, 20 hours a day that these animals are doing when they concentrate that light and that energy. So that's a huge part of it. It's just observing nature, seeing how these things work, and testing for yourself, with different labs and biomarkers. And yeah, again, we'll go deeper into that in another show, but I think this was a really good sort of overview to dive into some more topics in the future. So yeah, that's probably all I got to say for now.
I would just add to that, if for people who, I think you hit a nail on the head there. And I think for people who, for example, live in a cold country and it's the winter time, and what are you going to do? How are you going to get these fatty animal products into your body? There are some things that you can do, like if you can get game, obviously, if you have to check that it's not been grazing on sort of sort of pesticide-laden lands. But one easy way is if you can get butter. You can get grass-fed, pastured butter. And also same thing for grass-fed pastured egg yolks. You can really get a lot more vitamin D out of that, and that's a really good way to bolster your vitamin D during the winter. But you have to make sure that it's the right kind of butter. Kerrygold is a pretty good one, even though it's not organic. But if you can find an organic one, that's even better. And fish, because fish doesn't have the issue of soil depletion, because it's, if it's saltwater fish, it's coming from a mineral bath, so its mineral content is going to be way higher. Yeah, I think that's probably one of the best things you can do. I used to eat I still eat a quarter kilo a day of butter. That was the leanest I've ever been. But yeah, it was the highest performance. Yeah, any more tips or questions or anything? Or?
Do you have any recommendations for game? Because I haven't looked into this for many years, but now again, since I obviously started eating more meat and I have access to, might have access to both rabbit, deer, and moose. But the moose is very low on fat. But would you still recommend just going for the organs then? And then they're living completely wild, eating berries and grass and mushrooms.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. I think deer is probably, rabbit's also really low on fat. There's a disease called rabbit sickness, or it used to be called rabbit sickness, because people just sustain themselves from rabbit, wouldn't get enough fat. But I think, yeah, just any organs. You can have jugged hare, which is where you take the blood of a rabbit and congeal it. That's very nutritious. Yeah, any game, if you know where the source is, you can eat the organs. And if the organs are too strong for you, for example, the moose, then you can make like a meatloaf and kind of mince half the meat, the muscle meat, and half the organs. And then you can also get all sorts of funky organs in there as well. And that's a really good way, because it can be a little bit too strong. You can also soak it in milk overnight if you have some good quality milk to take the strength off.
Cool. Great tips. Thank you.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think probably most people don't have access to moose and deer and game. So, that's the ideal life if you're living in the wild maybe, or you're more in nature. But yeah, there's definitely farmers markets in most cities, and that's a good place to kind of start getting some more local natural sources. And then as far as supermarkets go, I think Ollie kind of nailed it. There's probably like 3 or 4 foods you can actually find that are pretty nutritious. So butter is definitely one source of really good fats. And you can get, Kerrygold. And I think there's actually some really good ones now in UK and a few places I've been that actually are selling raw butter now. So like from France and some of these areas where the animals again are outside, Normandy, these kind of regions. I think Beurre de Signy do a really good one that's raw in UK. You can get it in Tesco's. And I think probably most parts of Europe. And again, like here in Portugal, because Azores is a beautiful island that a lot of the butter and dairy comes from here. And it's like temperate climate where animals are basically grazing outside all year round. So, the problem with Kerrygold and even Anchor, which are pretty good brands, is that in New Zealand and Ireland, obviously in the winter, those cows come indoors and they feed them hay, but they probably supplement that feed with grains. And so again, like some of the year it's going to be really good, some of the year it's not. And it's pretty hard to test that. I mean, if you've got a really sensitive palate, you might be able to tell. And some people actually pretty nerdy. They stock up in the times of the year and stick it on their freezer when they think, oh, this is the grass-fed season. But there's definitely better options in some countries. Like in Portugal, we're really lucky that the Azores butter is just super cheap and it's ubiquitous, like it's everywhere, and it's probably the best in the world because the soil there is like volcanic and the grass is amazing and super nutrient dense. And the animals are outside all year round. They don't put them indoors because it's actually cheap to let them graze outdoors. So just understanding like where the animals are, what they're eating, how they're being fed, and all those kind of things makes a huge difference. But in the supermarkets, probably butter, eggs, fish. You can find generally pretty good sources like wild sources. You can get wild salmon. You don't have to buy the farm stuff. I also get sardines. I think even honestly, tin sardines is not my favorite, but if you can't get them fresh or frozen, that would be kind of my go-to in the winter in a cold country like maybe most parts of Europe. If you can't get that stuff fresh or it's too expensive for you, then probably the cheapest backup is tin sardines. And I generally say to stay away from all tin food. So this is just how important that is to get that stuff in your diet. You've got to get it from somewhere. You can't just cut it out. It's gonna have a cost. But yeah, that's definitely some useful tips, I think, for people out there. Yeah, I don't know, Holly, if you've got anything else. Otherwise, we can wrap this one up.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of information in a short period of time. I think that's kind of enough really for now. I guess we should do another one with light and with testing and stuff like that. We can expand on this stuff.
Awesome. Yeah, definitely. We're gonna do next time I'm the host. I'll probably do that one, so it'll be fun. All right, guys. Well, then we'll call it a day. Great chatting with you all, and yeah, we'll see you all again on Thursday.
Yes, Thursday. Take care, guys.
Yeah, take care. Bye.
Excellent.
Ciao.
Bye.